Welcome, everyone. I'm Jeffrey Goodman, Director of Marketing and Development for the YMCA of Northwest Louisiana. And we're here at 318 Latino Studios for Shreveport-Bossier, my city, my community, my home. And I absolutely cannot wait to have today's discussion. Our guest is Roy Murry. Roy, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Glad to be here.
Thank you. Well, Roy, I told you before we started, I think this first question I'm about to ask you is very possibly the longest question I've asked in the history of the podcast. So hang tight with me for 1 second, but I thought it was important to start here. So you were, I believe, the Director of Security for Caddo Schools for nearly 3 decades, retiring at the end of April of 2023.
That's correct.
So I want to start with this great quote of yours because I think it'll frame the conversation well. Here's what you said. You said, "For a lot of years, I've talked about the things that you do to make schools safe, and really it kind of boils down to about 2 things. If you can control who comes and goes on your school campuses, and you can supervise people that are on your school campuses, then you can pretty much keep schools as safe as you possibly can. But if you can't do one of those things, or if you can't do either of those things, then you can't keep any school safe." So pretty much in Caddo, what we've tried to concentrate on for the last 25 years is to find ways to control who comes and goes on our campuses and to better supervise the people that are on our campuses. That's the quote. So I want to cover a number of things security related in our schools with you today. My first specific question for you is, how did you approach mass shootings that occurred around the country? And tell me some of the things your team learned from looking at each of them.
Well, that's a great question. And really what we tried to do with the mass shootings around the country is to look at them as a training opportunity for us, to look at how someone was able to get onto a campus. Was it an outsider coming on campus to do the shooting? Was it a student at the school? What were the circumstances? And then to sit down with my team, and that includes law enforcement and that include Homeland Security, different folks like that, and to talk about how it happened on that particular school campus, and then could it happen on my campus? And if it could, what could we do to change that? And so we tried to look at the school shootings that happened around the country as a training opportunity to look at what we're doing, and are we doing the things that we need to do to prevent this from happening? And if we're not, then what do we need to change? And the great thing about Caddo in the 3 decades, and 3 decades, that sounds like a long time, I had the cooperation of the school board, had the cooperation of superintendents that allowed me to look at things and do things in different ways that had never been done in Caddo before. And so I had that opportunity, and I was very fortunate with that. And so that's pretty much how we approach mass shootings, is to look at them as training opportunities and to look at what we're doing and see if there's something that we could change.
Perfect. And I'm going to shift you a little bit. I've heard you talk about how important situational awareness is for our teachers and students. Talk to me some about that, if you could define it and explain what that means and why it's so important.
You know, when I was very fortunate, I didn't follow anyone as the Director of Security. There was a person in place that did a great job, but his was more designed with risk management. And so when I was brought on as the Director of Security from a law enforcement background, I wanted to see what we could do to make our school safer, of course. And so one of the things that I found is that, and what is my opinion in the school shootings that have happened, a lot of the school shootings, is there was no situational awareness that the teachers had that something was going wrong quick enough to do something about it. And that's pretty much what situational awareness is to recognize when something's not right and then to act on that. And teachers don't receive that type of training when they're going to college for their education degree. It's not something that, teachers are trained in. Law enforcement's trained in situational awareness. The military is trained in situational awareness. Pilots are trained in situational awareness. And if you're situationally aware that you recognize that something's not normal, that something's out of the ordinary, and then to reach back into your training and your experience and then do something. And that's the biggest thing that I think schools lacked. And so that's something that we tried to push in Caddo. We used what was called scenario-based training. I met a guy who started Safe Havens International in my travels and different things when I was going to different conferences. And I sat down with him and we talked about situational awareness and we talked about scenario-based training. And scenario-based training that we used was called the first 30 seconds. So what we tried to impress when we trained in this type of training was what you do in the first 30 seconds determines how big or how small an incident is. And it doesn't have to be a school shooting. You can apply the first 30 seconds to any crisis that happens on a school campus. And the odds that a school shooting is going to happen, it's the lowest, it's the highest impact, but it's actually the lowest probability of something happening. You're going to deal with school fights. You're going to deal with non-custodial parents. You're going to deal with parents being angry, that type of thing more often than not. But situational awareness applies in all of those situations. And my, I guess, thinking on this type of incident was if you could be prepared for the worst thing that could happen to you, then you could be prepared for the things that would happen that were below that.
And a couple of things. First question is, you said I didn't really follow anyone into this position. So does that mean you were the very first director of security for Caddo Schools? Is that accurate?
There was a supervisor of security who was in charge of school security and risk management. I was the first person hired by the Caddo Parish School Board that my sole responsibility was school safety and school security.
Okay. And with situational awareness, do you think about, like we all have heard about active shooter training, is situational awareness in the way that you think about it and describe it, does that apply to students as well or purely to teachers? Meaning, like, are we training, do we need to, and are we training our students to recognize and recognize things that could be happening and what to do in the event that there is a moment of recognition?
It certainly applies to everyone on the school campus. It applies to students. It applies to the custodial staff. It applies to teachers. I would say that we spent much more time training teachers, training security personnel, training custodial staff, training the adults on the campus. It was pretty much left to the school's responsibility with their lockdown drills, their shelter-in-place drills, their bomb threat drills, all of the drills that they did that included student training. We certainly talked with the students about when you see something, say something. That got to be the big push, because when we look at the school shootings that have happened around the country, very few of them happened, I guess, where the shooter was the only person that knew about it. They had either made remarks, made threats, been on social media, and talked about it. And, I can't tell you the number of school shootings that we looked at the after-action reports of where it was after the fact where a student said, well, I knew he was going to do that. Or someone said, I knew he was going to do that because he said he was going to do that. He just didn't say when, or something like that. And so we spent a lot of time when we were training students or talking with students to get them to say something. That was the main push with the students. And to understand when they did lockdown drills at schools for teachers to explain to the students why we do certain things, why we put you in this position, why we want you here. And so as far as the student training, that was more pushed on the school drills and talking to students about if you see something, say something.
And we're going to talk a lot today about kind of where we are in staffing every school with SROs, where we are in getting to single point entry with all the schools. Where are we in terms of, I know you're 16 months removed from the job, but where were we when you left in terms of providing some sort of situational awareness training to all the Caddo teachers?
We made training videos where we met with where I actually did a training video that was required by the superintendent to be used in every school for staff development purposes. Can't tell you the number of schools that we spoke, that we were at their staff development, where we met with teachers, we talked with teachers. We did at least, I want to say it was at least one, maybe two a year, where we met on Saturdays. It was open to any teacher, any school employee to come to a certain school. We brought in law enforcement that would actually fire movie blanks inside a school to create situational awareness. Because when we think we know what a gunshot sounds like, you may not know what a gunshot sounds like if you're on the third floor of a school and the gunshot's on the first floor, or there's a gunshot in the parking lot and you're inside the building. So we train teachers to understand this is what it sounds like. And if you make a mistake and you cause something and we go into lockdown, you got to do 3 lockdown drills a year anyway. Just count it as a drill and move forward. And that's the other thing that we did, where instead of the teachers sitting in their classrooms and the principal being the one that comes on the loudspeaker that says go into lockdown, we set it up through Navigate 360 where teachers had the ability to be able to activate a lockdown from their phones in the classroom. And that's what we pushed in the latter part when I was there, and I'm sure Don's following through up there, is to let teachers initiate the drill. Let them feel comfortable starting a fire drill or a lockdown drill or a shelter in place, because the odds are they're going to be the first ones that know about it anyway. The office is not going to be the first people that know about it. And so that was the push we made on situation. I think it's improved. I think it's something that you have to make sure that you stay after all the time, because you got new teachers coming in all the time. Plus, I think school districts neglect substitute teachers, and they don't provide for substitute teachers the training that they need to provide. At any given day in Caddo Parish Public Schools, how many substitute teachers do you have? And if you're not training your substitute teachers in situational awareness just like you are your regular teachers, then that's a problem, because you've got, on a good day, you may only have 5, but that's 5 classrooms with 25 kids sitting in them. So we need to make sure that we're doing the situational awareness. And I did meet with substitute teachers. I did offer all of my training to substitute teachers, but I met with them every year and trained every year with substitute teachers.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. And I also didn't think, but I learned as I was preparing for today's discussion, I know that you started with your focus on high schools, and then once you shored up high schools, take it to middle schools. And it wasn't really, I think I read a quote or some sort of explanation from you where you didn't think you really needed to focus on elementary schools until Sandy Hook, and Sandy Hook made everyone realize, well, we need to do the same thing in our elementary schools that we've done with our high school and middle schools.
When I saw Sandy Hook, it hit me like a ton of bricks that, we had spent all of this money, we'd spent all this training, we'd made sure we had police officers in high schools and middle schools, and our expectation was none of this was ever going to happen at an elementary school. And Sandy Hook proved that wrong. And so from that point on, we worked toward whatever we had in a high school, we got it in an elementary school. And I mean, my biggest accomplishment, I would say, if I'm going to say I had a great accomplishment of something, it was getting a police officer in every school in Caddo Parish. Because I believe in law enforcement. I believe police officers make schools safer. And these police are, even if we had to use off-duty officers, to have a police officer on that campus, especially an elementary campus, just made me feel so much better. I know it had to make the parents of those elementary kids feel so much better. And, everything is based, unfortunately, on school shootings. That's pretty much what we focus on. And so the length of time that a school shooting happens in a school is about 4 minutes tops. And if we didn't have police officers on those campuses and we were having to pick up a phone and dial 911, even in the best of situations, it's going to be over with before the police ever get there. And 9 times out of 10, and all of the school shootings that happen around the country, they were over with. And So I felt like having a police officer on that campus who could immediately respond to a threat or a possible threat, then we were that much closer to keeping everybody as safe as we could possibly keep them.
No, absolutely. I think that's a extraordinary achievement, and I commend you.
Well, and I commend the school board because the school board is the one that came up with the funding for it. And I do have to give credit to the school boards that I've worked for over the past 3 decades and the superintendents that I've worked for. They did not let money become the biggest issue. And we all fight about budgets and we all concerned about money, but they made sure that the schools, as far as school safety and school security, had the funding they needed to try to keep them as safe as they could. Which
is exactly where I was going. So I thought this was an amazing stat that I needed to share. I read in an article from 2020 that when you became Director of Security for Caddo Parish Schools in 1993, your budget for safety was about $490,000. Today, and I think this was from 2020 or 2021, today, as worries about possible school shootings increase across the country, the parish spends about $6.7 million a year on security for its schools. And I think you answered this question, but I know one of your goals was to have an officer on every campus. My question was going to be, how are we coming with that? It sounds like we've completed that.
It's already happened.
All right, so my next question is just talk to me a little bit about how searches are done on different age students in our Caddo schools.
Well, I mean, we can search under reasonable suspicion, and schools are funny. I guess I learned over the 30 years is that, I would have, especially when you had security officers on school campuses or police officers on school campuses, that you had, if somebody's lunch money got stolen, they would want to do a search. If someone's, cell phone got stolen, they'd want to do a search. So we stopped all that. I restricted searches to strictly looking for weapons, possibly drugs at some point. But it's usually no more than a pat-down search. And now we did do random searches with the metal detector, handheld metal detectors. And I'll talk about the metal detectors in a minute because that's changed also. But we did, in the high school and middle school, there was a requirement from the superintendent that we do random searches on a weekly basis. And a random search, maybe one bus comes in and they get waved with the wand to check in for weapons. But that's what we restricted our searches to. I didn't want to be challenged for doing searches on someone for stealing $5 when a $5 bill looks just like a $5 bill. It doesn't matter who has it in their pocket. And so what we tried to do was restrict our searches to weapons, things that would cause harm to someone, and it was normally done with a metal detector. Now, since then, before I left, and that's another thing that we've accomplished in the high schools and middle schools, and Don may have even gotten into the elementary schools now, the metal detectors have changed so much, and so we bought through some funding, a one-time spend on open gate metal detectors, which are the metal detectors that most of the pro football teams and different ones use. They do not pick up cell phones. They don't pick up. Now, we did run into some problems with laptops as far as picking up laptops and backpacks, but normally they will just pick up a weapon.
And let me interrupt for a second. These
Sure.
are portable. These are
portable and can be moved
okay.
from place to place,
Okay.
but we managed to have one, and of course we had to work, and I'm sure you'll get to the question of single entry point schools.
I will.
But they were impossible. It's impossible to use a walk-through metal detector if you don't have a single entry point school, unless you have one at every entrance of every building. And so when we finally worked through capital projects, getting most of our schools with single entry point, then we were able to go to these open gate metal detectors and put them at every high school and every middle school. Certainly, again, the elementary schools, I'm not wanting to leave them out, but we felt like where most kids were carrying weapons were in the high schools and middle schools at that point.
So what I'm hearing you say is today at every Caddo middle school and high school there is a metal detector.
There is an open gate metal detector.
And they use it.
Should be using it on a daily basis. I can't speak for what's going on.
You shouldn't be able, if there's a single entry point, you shouldn't be able to get into the school
without walking through that metal detector.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So yes, I know that one of your main priorities was access control.
Mm-hmm.
So my question kind of has three parts. Tell me what access control means, some of the challenges that Caddo schools face in achieving that, and how we're coming today with limiting point of entry at all our schools.
Well, access control is how can someone get onto your campus? That's the simple answer for it. And there's not a school in Caddo Parish. I think the newest school in Caddo Parish may be 40 years old now. We've not built a new school. Our schools were built for students to walk to school. Most of our schools are in neighborhoods, and they were built for kids to walk to school and come from their house, the neighbor's house, everyone's house, so they're approaching schools from different directions. So none of the schools in Caddo Parish were built with security in mind. The only school that I really thought was kind of built with security in mind, and I think it was just the style of the architecture at the time, was Green Oaks High School. And because you could lock every outside door and open just one and control who came in through that door. Most campuses have multiple buildings. You can approach from different directions. Most high schools are very large campuses, large footprints as far as the amount of land and different openings and different things like that. So that restricted the use of metal detectors. You know, if you have an open gate metal detector and you have a campus like Byrd High School, for instance, that has multiple buildings, if it's not controlled, if you can't control the access and they can come on at any point, and they could get to a parking lot at any point, and you don't have a walk-through metal detector at every building, and you're not checking everyone as they come at every class change.
It's moot. So talk to me, what does the transformation process look like to retrofit a school?
I'm going to tell you, really, you ought to do a podcast with our head of construction, Steve White, because he was amazing. It was amazing the things, you know, with us sitting down at tables and looking at schools, the things that we came up with. And if you go out and you look at schools and, you know, go out there and look at the schools, and we can show you the things that we added where we closed in breezeways and added doors. We had to use fencing, and not a lot of principals are big fans of fencing, you know. Everyone always says this thing about, you know, you don't want your school to look like a prison. My response was, if you want to see a prison, go out on Forum Drive and look at CCC, and I don't have any schools that look like that, I promise you.
Sure.
And but we had to use 8 and 10-foot fencing around schools, and we closed in open breezeways, and, you know, did construction where no construction existed. And so it's a process. It's a long process, and we had bond money that was set aside by the voters in Caddo Parish, and we get, I think it's, I want to say, and I could be wrong on the figure, but it's in excess of $1 million a year.
So let me just interrupt one second. So let's say I have a school that has 5 entrances. What am I doing to render 4 of them no longer usable?
You know, the greatest form of access control, and every school has it, it's called a lock. You just lock that door. It's like we talked with teachers about control. You know, there's 3 levels of access control. There's the entire footprint, the buildings, and the classroom. We needed to be really good at 2 of them. We couldn't. There's no way that I was going to control the access on large footprint of all these high school campuses. But if I could control the access on the buildings and the classrooms, then I could keep your school reasonably safe. If I couldn't control those, then I can't keep your school safe, because it's just like I said, if you can't do one of those things, then you can't keep it safe. So what we focused on were the buildings and the classrooms. And so instead of going out and putting an 8-foot fence around Woodlawn High School all the way around it, concentrating on fencing in buildings and closing up breezeways and locking doors that weren't in use. And yeah, that means that you may have to change your traffic patterns of schools, and you may not allow students to go the way they went the year before. But we can do that. Kids will do what you ask them to do and train them to do. Not everybody's, they're going to go out and they're going to push doors open. I went and did I'm not going to tell you the district. I've been asked by several districts to go in and do assessments of their district over the years, and I went to one. They had built a brand new school. It was a beautiful school, and they were able to lock doors and all that. And when I got there and I met with the principal and I talked with him, and I said, great looking school, are your doors locked? He said, yeah. I said, do you check the doors on a regular basis? And he said, oh yeah, we check them all the time. And I said, well, let's just walk. And the first door I walked to that opened to an outside area, I walked up to the door and just put my hand on the door and pushed it open, and his eyes got big. And I looked in there, and they had stuffed paper in the hole where the plunger goes in. And so the door was shut, but there was no way they could lock it. And so kids will find ways. And the biggest detriment to security on a school campus is convenience. If I inconvenience you and make you take 10 more steps, then people try to find a way around your security. So if I told a teacher you had to lock this door and you couldn't go to the parking lot directly there, but it was quicker for them to do that, as in one of the school shootings where a door got blocked open so they could run to the parking lot. Those are the type of things that I learned from looking at the things that happened around the country.
I hate to ask this question, but it popped in my head. So, all right, we have 5 doors, and we're going to lock 4 of them, and we're going to make one of them the sole entry point. Let's say we have a potential school shooting that involves multiple parties, and they're working in tandem. And can one of the perpetrators or one of the people involved unlock the door so that the other person that's working in concert or partnership with them circumvent a metal detector? And so how do you treat situations like that, or how do you prevent situations like that from occurring?
One of the other things that we tried to do with our camera systems, and I want to say, I'm trying to remember the number. I had in excess of I can't even remember. I had anywhere from 70 to 100 cameras on every campus, or sometimes.
I think I read a number 6,000 plus cameras.
Yeah, something like that. And so one of the things that we tried to do was make sure that we had a camera that was focused on every entrance and exit of the campus. And, no one can sit at a computer monitor and look at 200 cameras. You just can't do it. And we don't have the manpower, or we didn't have, they may have now after I'm gone, to position someone on every door. And so what we tried to push through the schools was you have people that sit at their desk all day, whether it be the receptionist, whether it be the secretary in the office, whether it be the bookkeeper. And where no one can look at 6,000 cameras, I can put an extra monitor on a computer, and I can put 6 cameras on it. And no, you're not going to sit there and stare at it all the time, but movement draws your attention. And so what we tried to get schools to do, and most of the schools did it, as far as I know, is to set an extra monitor on a desk, put 6 cameras up that allowed those entrances and exits to be looked at. And then if you saw a kid messing around that door, then you had the walkie-talkie. You were able to send a security person to it, that type of thing. We also have security coordinators on all of our campuses, except the elementary campus, because I replaced those security coordinators with police officers. But they're patrolling, and they should be walking past those doors, checking those doors, entrances, and exits to make sure they're not being blocked open, either by a teacher or a student, and to make sure that the doors are all locked like they should be. And so, no, give you 100% that no one could do that, can't do that. But we tried to put things in place that allowed us to monitor those doors, to keep a tab on that door. Some schools even have alarms on some of the doors, that if that door is pushed open, then there's an audible alarm that goes off that notifies someone that door's been messed with. So.
Well, Roy, those were all my set questions. Are there things, 29-year career of extraordinary achievement. I mean, there's so much I could have covered. I mean, those were just the things that jumped off at the page to me as I was prepping for today. Right. But anything at all that you want to get into, we have all the time in the world, and I'd love to. Well,
I just think that, school security, teachers, principals, there's so many things that are pushed on them by the State Department as far as curriculum, how to teach a certain subject, all of those type of things. And, I think sometimes school security, unless something happens somewhere in the country, is something that gets pushed to the side. I've been very fortunate. I had superintendents that didn't let that happen, and that there were requirements, and they had to do certain drills, and they had to do certain trainings, and those had to all be reported into our office. And so those things were good. But I think that people are under the misconception that drills are training. And that's probably the biggest issue that we faced in school security. It's the biggest issue that I see a lot of schools face around the state that I've been to their districts and different things, is that, we don't need to train, we do our drills. Well, drills test your training. And the problem is, if you don't train and you try to do a drill, you're probably not doing it right anyway. And crisis response plans are another big thing that, I was for, 15 years, 20 years, I was an instructor in the SRO program for the state, where I taught a class on school safety and school assessments to the police officers that were going to work in the different schools around the state. And I always asked the question at the beginning of the class, how many police officers, how many of you sitting in this class know what your responsibility is according to the school's crisis response plan? And inevitably, I would get no hands raised. And then I would say, how many of you have even seen the crisis response plan? And still no hands raised. So I think we need to make sure, whether it's in Caddo Parish, Bossier Parish does a great job. Their director of security, I've worked with, 3 different ones in Bossier Parish, and they work very hard and strive very hard to keep their schools as safe as they possibly can. And they, again, have SROs in every school, and they're way ahead of the game than a lot of other places in the state, and they do a great job. But, we neglect I lost my train of thought there. We neglect what we should be doing as far as our training with these schools. Did I lose me?
No, you were talking about like how you would talk to these SROs, and maybe they weren't aware of the particular school's crisis response plan. And
what I was going to say with that is, training needs to be based upon your crisis response plan, and you need to make sure that your crisis response plan works, because if you train it and then you drill it, it needs to do what you want it to do. And I think so many people never look at their crisis response plan. They don't train their crisis response plan. The state requires that you do 3 emergency preparedness drills and 10 fire drills. That's the requirement from the state. We do 10 fire drills. When was the last time someone died in a school fire? Long time, 50, 60 years maybe. But we do 10 drills a year for that. When was the last time someone was killed in a school shooting? We're required to do 3 drills. So there's kind of a disconnect there. And
are crisis response plans specific to each school, or are there universal crisis response?
There is a crisis response plan that the district that some years back, we had a emergency preparedness grant for $500,000, and a company was hired. Safe Plans International was hired. They came in, they did assessments of all of our schools. We worked with them. They helped us create a district crisis response plan and a crisis response plan that went to all schools. Each school has specific things, specific places. The plan is, procedures. A lot of the procedures are the same, but there are specific things for each individual school because every school is not the same. And so, different places where you would shelter in place, different places where you would do whatever. And so, I think that where we, they say do a lockdown drill. So we do a lockdown drill. What does your crisis response plan say that your lockdown drill is supposed to look like? And are you doing the things that your crisis response plan says you need to do? And so that would be the biggest thing. If somebody, a new director of security, asks me, what should I do? Go look at your crisis response plan. Make sure that your crisis response plan does what you want it to do. And if it does, then train it. If it doesn't, change it. And so that's the biggest thing, and I think what we've got to do is make sure that schools see what happens to someone else. And, yes, it's a sad thing when a school shooting happens somewhere else, but it's not happening to you. So take advantage of that. Look at how it happened, where it happened. Could it happen to you? And if it could, change what would make the outcome different for you, and do that.
And Roy, is there anything else? I do want to, I want to thank you for nearly 30 years of extraordinary and invaluable and incredibly important service to this community and to our families and to our kids.
Well, Jeffrey, I appreciate it. No, I think, the good thing is my replacement, I think, is a good man. I think he's going to do, he's got a son in a high school in Caddo Parish. He's got a wife who's a principal in Caddo Parish. So he has an investment in this parish. He's going to work hard. He's going to keep kids as safe as he can possibly keep them. And believe me, he does not hesitate to call me. So, and I don't hesitate to give him advice, even if he doesn't take it.
Well, Roy, I thank you so much.
Oh, Jeffrey, I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you.